Zanita, you guessed it. It's that time of week again. It is time for Record Live. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. It comes around quickly. I'm like, oh, another record live already. Feels like we just did that.
It comes around super quickly, which must mean that we're very busy in between times because, the time just flies.
Speaking of busy, you have just been away. Do you want to tell us where you've been, what you've been doing?
I have just returned. It was a quick weekend trip to Papua New Guinea. It was a good trip. I appreciated particularly the warmth. It's like 30 degrees up there.
Jealous.
They have had some unseasonal rain in Port Moresby. I think it's usually a lot drier at this time of year, but it was very green, very humid. The people are wonderful, as always. I always get a kick out of spending time with Adventist church members up in Papua New Guinea. We did some writing workshops at Pacific Adventist University. We covered a lot of different topics across the weekend. We also did some workshops at Korobosea Church in the city. And yeah, we had a lot of fun. Well, I had a lot of fun. Hopefully those who attended also had some fun. Yeah, it was just a really good time all around, I'd say.
Do you have any golden moments?
You're in the islands when you rock up to Friday night Vespers, you sneak into the back pew, try and sit inconspicuously, and then they ask you to take the service. So, I went from sitting up the back to preaching to a bunch of kids, well, not kids, university lecturers and students and whoever else was around. That was, you're alive when you have to think on your feet like that. It was quite a surprise, but it was good. I half expected to have to do some kind of thing at some point during the weekend. So I scrambled something and it was all good. But yeah, it was good fun.
I feel like whenever you go to I'm not speaking from experience, this is just from what I've heard, but whenever you go to the islands, you've kind of got to go with a sermon in the back of your mind, just because at some stage someone is going to ask you to preach.
I would recommend it, even if it's a morning devotional or an evening, thing, or just in a small group setting. There's always the opportunity to share, which I think is a good thing because it means that you have to be in the Word, you have to be updating your testimonies, your stories, your thoughts, just so if someone did ask, you've got something to share. I think we could probably all learn from that because there might be the opportunity for any of us if the Spirit, leads to do that. So, yeah, it was a good trip.
Nice. We have another topic in mind, but perhaps sometimes you can run us through on Record Live how to quickly scrummage together a sermon.
Yeah, that would be an interesting topic, wouldn't it?
But what are we talking about today, Jared?
Good questions, Anita. I went to PNG, and in the time between, I think, when I arrived and when I came home, the news had reported that Israel was dropping bombs on Iran. Now, that's quite a seismic geopolitical conflict, a war. You could say that it's been coming for some time. There's always been tension there, but in a world that seems to be hurtling towards World War III, dare I say it, there's a lot of different conflict zones now, and they're very prominent. They're very tense. They're drawing in other nations and whatever. Some weeks ago, actually, we determined to do a column called The 10 in Record that we have regularly on verses that will help you find peace. So it's in this issue of Record coming out this Sabbath, the 21st of June. And there's 10 verses in here that we thought would be good verses to help you find peace. Now, we weren't necessarily thinking about peace in war. Yeah, because, that is maybe beyond the scope of you as an individual to solve. There's big conflicts. What can I do, little old me? But we all face, I guess, conflict, chaos, difficulty in our day-to-day lives, stressful things happen. There's craziness all around us. There's tension with sometimes relationships that we have, or the cost of living crisis. The news and social media can bombard us with headlines that make our soul unsettled, I guess you could say. And
Mm,
so finding peace is probably a good thing to do at times
mm,
like this. And I guess we thought we'd talk about it today because we like to get practical with our faith on Record Live, and peace, um, if we can find it, is something that will really practically help our lives, I suppose. So I guess
mm,
that's the first question to pose. Can we create a sense of peace, or can we find peace in our own lives?
mm.
What do you think,
Yeah.
Zanita?
I think we can. I think it's probably a question people find themselves asking at some point in their lives, especially when things look like they're going mad around us. Is like, is peace actually possible? And like you said, it's not world peace, but like inner peace. Can we experience that? And I think something that I'm learning is that we have to remember that peace often takes time. Like, often we have to wait to see peace or to experience peace. Rarely does that actually just happen in, like, a moment. I do know, like, I have heard stories where, for example, I have a friend who, he was in jail, and his experience of coming to know God was he just felt this, like, instant peace that, like, surpassed all understanding, like we read in the Bible. And for him, that was the thing that really, like, changed his life, and that was, like, an instant thing and, like, a flood of feelings. But I feel like for a lot of people, they kind of are in a season of life where they're really struggling, or something is happening, or the world has gone mad, and they kind of like struggle to experience that peace that we kind of promised in the Bible. And I think a lot of the times in the Bible, or not in the Bible, I don't think it actually says this in the Bible, but a lot of the times in Christian circles, we hear this idea that peace is a person, referring to Jesus. And that's always kind of confused me, because it's like, so what? But I think, like, what it's kind of getting at is, like, we can trust Jesus, but in order to experience peace, we kind of need to trust Jesus, and trust takes time to build. Like, we don't just trust people naturally, like, off the bat. We usually, like, I trust my parents because they've shown me years of, like, loyalty, and years that they've got my back, and years that they love me. I trust my friends because they've been there for me over long periods. Like, I don't necessarily just, like, trust the guy at 7-Eleven who is charging me for petrol, or, like, someone who calls me up asking if I want a discount on my electricity. Like, it's kind of one of those things that has to be built. And so I think that kind of comes into the whole experiencing peace thing, because I don't know about you, but this was my experience where for years, like, at the start of my journey with God, I learnt all these things about God, and I had this idea that when I faced my I don't know, when I faced a period of discomfort or struggle, that I would just be able to pray and experience peace, and that would just be like a quick thing. But when I did come to that point in life, that was not how it looked. Like, it was almost like, wait, where is this peace that you promised me? Why aren't I experiencing this? And I kind of had to learn that, it's not just a instant thing. That there's a lot more to it than that.
Just to rewind a little bit, your story there about your friend, was he seeking peace of any kind? Was he actually asking God and then God gave him peace? Like, I'm just trying to understand the logistics of what happened there.
I believe he was in jail, and one of his inmates gave him a Bible, or was reading Bible verses to him, and so he started to kind of, like, hear these things about God. But it was, I guess, a bit of an experiment, that prayer. Like, he hadn't come to a full place of, like, I believe in God.
Right, right,
And
right.
yeah.
He was reaching out, connecting, trying to find something, and that sense of peace that flooded him sort of
Yeah.
convinced him that God was real, or God was worth
Mm.
testing, trying. Yeah, that's interesting, because it's almost like, as you were saying, the peace comes after a choice or a decision that we make. And I think where we get the idea that that peace is a person is from maybe the Prince of Peace being one of Jesus' names. So Jesus as the Prince of Peace. And then, okay, if he represents peace, what does that look like for us? And I really liked what you said about trusting. We have to make a choice to trust God. Did we talk on this show? I think it was on Science Radio, actually. We talked about the abundance mindset. I guess that feeds into this conversation a little bit, or it's what comes up for me when you were talking about this. What we find that we're trying to answer in and of ourselves is that we run out of ourselves eventually, I suppose. But Jesus is or can be the answer. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I can provide the answer to your needs. And so I guess in that sense, maybe peace comes from a radical act of trusting God. Thoughts?
Yeah. I guess so. I think I don't know, there's a few things I'm thinking at the moment. I always think of C.S. Lewis when thinking about like peace and trust, because we know C.S. Lewis's story. He had quite a journey, but when he was quite like solid in his faith, he lost his wife, and he wrote this book called A Grief Observed, and it was kind of one of his rawest books. And it's where you kind of see him, I guess, really grappling with like sorrow and doubt and this lack of peace. And he's really honest in his book, and he writes this one line where he's like, where is God? Go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain. And what do you find? A door slammed in your face. And he's essentially wrestling with this idea of like the absence of peace that he was promised. And I guess he thought that God would like guard his heart and guard his mind and be a more solid rock. But over time, he did come to a place of peace, but it wasn't like an immediate comfort like he expected. It was like a settled trust that like God is always there through everything. And just because he believes in God and follows God doesn't mean it's like a life of comfort and a life of luxury. Like, doesn't mean you won't experience any negative things or feelings. And I guess he realized that, yeah, peace doesn't necessarily mean like emotional relief. It meant like trusting God in the silence, even when there's no clarity, and trusting that all the things that God says still hold true. And that doesn't always come out like a good ending. Like we can, I guess, be trusting that God is good, but that doesn't mean that everything is going to work out like we hoped. Like there's a lot of people who have stories where their prayers haven't been answered, and yeah, I guess they're stuck with that challenging question of like, why does God answer some prayers and not others? And why did this happen? And some of those answers we just will never know. But it's trusting, I guess, that God is still good, even though things haven't gone the way you hoped, or even though the world is a disaster.
Yeah, I found, I suppose, in my own experience, that sort of door slam shut visual from that quote that you read really stood out to me. It's like you're there, and it's not even that you see it being slammed shut. It's sometimes that you just arrive at the place where you want to make a decision, or you want to find peace, or you want some outcome, and you realize the door is there and it's shut, and you're like, well, where do I go now? What do I do? And so for me, I've found that can be a very frustrating experience, I suppose. And there is a lot of what would not be described as peace, I suppose. Discontent, difficulty, struggling in your own mind. Your brain can get into these circular patterns of thinking, where you just revolve around the same thing. How do I think my way out of this solution? At least that's how I tend to, when I'm struggling with something, I'll keep playing it over in my mind to try and come up with a solution. But sometimes you're stuck like internally within your system. There is no real answer because there's nothing you can do. In some senses, you're quite helpless in that space. I guess In those times, though, and we've talked about this on the show before, I remember back to other times where they've been long drawn out periods of feeling like God wasn't answering me, but at the same time remembering that he did answer eventually, or there was a lesson that I needed to learn, or some other,
Hmm.
rationale. My brain finds a way to understand what had happened in those seemingly closed door situations. So, for example, um, I feel like just my personality wise, and maybe this is true for many others, if you got instant answers to all your prayers, I just don't think you would develop in a healthy way. You know,
Hmm.
if that grief that he felt, C.S. Lewis, was erased by God. It was wiped clean, instantly as soon as he came with that prayer. Could you develop anger towards God for almost erasing the hurt that you
Hmm.
lost a loved one? Like, it's a significant thing to lose a spouse.
Yeah.
Would you feel like a robot? Does it take away your free choice if God just does that in the instant? And
Hmm.
and those are philosophical sort of, ideas, and may not help in the midst of actual grief. In the midst
Hmm.
of grief, keep your philosophy, your theories. It's not, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very well to sit here and talk about some of this, but in the way I was processing it, when you were saying that, I was like, wow, that's so true, and it's so hard, and it's so difficult. But what's the alternative that God has? If God wipes your brain to make you content or peaceful after such a traumatic or difficult experience, is that is that fair on you? Is it fair on your autonomy and your humanity? Like, is it respecting your free will? Yeah,
Hmm.
those are some of the
Yeah.
things that come up for me.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely get what you mean. I remember, oh, during COVID, this is like a silly small example, but it hit me hard at the time. During COVID, I remember feeling like everyone was talking about the end of the world, and I was like, oh, I don't really want the world to end. Like, I actually like it here, and I still want to get married and have kids. And like, I remember praying in that period, like, oh, can you I don't know, like, help me to kind of, like, desire heaven, because I feel like me not wanting to go to heaven is, like, a reflection of me not really understanding how good you are. And following
Mm,
that was just a whole like, a few years of just so much struggle and so many things that were kind of, like, pulled out of my life, and I actually did start to, like, really yearn for heaven. So I think it's also, like, we don't really yearn for him and yearn for more when everything is like so good. If God was to take away C.S. Lewis's grief and his heartache, um, he wouldn't. I don't know. He wouldn't know how good it was almost. Or yeah,
mm,
that's a philosophical question. I think also as humans we have a tendency to think. Um, how do I pronounce this word? Catastrophically.
mm,
And so
mm,
when things aren't going good, our head can really get the better of us, and we just think the worst will happen, and um, we catastrophize things, and we think the worst case possible scenarios, and that also robs us from experiencing peace. It's not so much the circumstances that are actually robbing us of peace. Sometimes it's like our mindset that is robbing us of peace, and I think sometimes getting better at correcting your thoughts is like super powerful and transformative when you're trying to experience peace, because it can be like a massive head thing at times, I think.
mm. And that phrase, the peace that passes understanding, like, it's almost like you shouldn't have peace in this situation, but you do because you know that God is sovereign and he's over all. And that's what I think of. I like that phrase. Um, Only because it makes me think about peace slightly differently. It likes,
Mm,
what does it mean that it doesn't make sense? What does it mean that it passes human understanding? How does that happen? And so I guess for me, it's like that peace isn't always something that comes super easily. Sometimes it's hard won, hard fought, as we've been talking about, but also sometimes it does come from God when it really shouldn't. Like, life can be catastrophic, as you said. It can actually be worse than just us catastrophizing things. It can actually be terrible.
Totally.
I saw an interview on I think it was on a clip that I was watching the other day with the Abood father. He lost his children in that car accident. A drugged up drunk driver took out some of his kids and their cousins, and he was talking about forgiveness for this guy. Now, the peace that he is able to find as a father who has had his kids taken away from him by a stupid decision from someone else, that is peace that passes understanding for me. That is peace that only God can provide. And so, and then you see interviews with Christians in the Middle East who have been persecuted. I saw there was a nun. I think she lived in Syria or somewhere, and she was the last Christian in the village. She was the last caretaker of this old historic church, this beautiful church that was there, and they're trying to drive her out. They're trying to persecute her and get rid of her, and she's saying, well, they can kill me, but I need to stay here. Like, this is my commitment, this is my mission. And only God can put that kind of peace, contentment, sacrificial spirit in us. I believe. I just can't see how our own human nature can create something like that within us. And so, yeah, it really is a choice. It is a supernatural gift sometimes that only comes from God.
It reminds me of that song, that hymn, "It Is Well," where it's I don't know if you know the story behind when I think it says, "When peace like a river attends my way," and then it goes on to say, "It is well with my soul." But the guy who wrote that, his 4 daughters died in a ship crossing out the Atlantic, and so he wrote that during that time. But which is profound. It's exactly that verse, when peace, like the peace that surpasses understanding, because it's like, how can you experience peace amidst all of that?
Horatio Spafford, I think his name was.
Horatio.
Zanita, you have quite an interest in health and well-being. I'm interested to know if there are any practical things we can do in our lives to try and cultivate some of that peace, or think about some of that peace. We've said that peace is a choice. It's a gift from God. Sometimes it's only available from Him. But are there things we can do to be more peaceful, I suppose, or be more contented, that are practical things in our lives that we can do?
Yeah, I like to keep I like to remember the phrase peace is a practice, because I think there are definitely things you can do, and I think even before you kind of are in the chaos, there are things that you can kind of be doing. Like I said, learning to kind of correct your thoughts is something that I think you can start doing before life is chaotic. You can just like pick up that habit.
So, like, is it Paul? It says, I take every thought captive, something like that. So that concept of you're thinking something and you're like, actually, it's just how I feel, or it's just my human reaction. I need to grab and control that, and actually I can reframe that in some sense. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's one thing. Another thing I think is being thankful. I think Paul says in the Bible as well, he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And that word anxious there, it means, like when you translate it, means to be in pieces, which is exactly how we feel kind of in these situations where things are chaotic. We just feel like in shattered pieces. But like, what do you do with that? And this verse is kind of saying, like, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And I think that's really important, because so often we're just like hyper focused. I guess this is our faulty mindset again. We're just hyper focused on what is going wrong, when there can be like a million things that are still going well in our life. And I think when we focus on the good things, it kind of puts our mind in perspective. Like, we're not just single-mindedly focused on that one thing, but we're aware that there are other good things in our life. And like you said before, that can be like thanksgiving from the past. Like, we can thank God for how things have turned out in the past, and that can give us hope and peace for that things will like kind of come around again. I think that's another thing. I think there's a few things I remember. Go.
I was going to say, so inform your emotions, give thanks in everything. You got some more?
I got some more. I think I remember there was a time in my life. I don't know if I've ever shared this on record live, maybe not, but it was a time similar when I prayed this prayer about um, wanting to, I guess, desire heaven. And a few
Mm,
months after that, life was just kind of crazy, and I wasn't experiencing really much peace at all. But I was experiencing peace when I would go into the ocean and go surfing. It was just like my safe place for a period. And one day I was out in the surf and there was like a lot of people out there. So I decided to just go to a little like part of the break where there wasn't anyone. And I was surfing there for a while. And as I was surfing there, this guy came along and he started surfing there as well. And I had recently had like a skateboarding accident. So I had this like open wound on my knee that I'd wrapped up with Glad wrap. And I just caught a wave and I was kind of thinking, oh, should I go get another wave or should I paddle back in? And I started feeling these like aching pains in my knee that I'd wrapped up. So I was like, I'll go back in, like I'll paddle back in. And as I was paddling back in, um, this guy who was out there with me, he got attacked by a shark and he died instantly. And I was like so angry like after this because I was like, I felt like God had taken like the one like peaceful thing in my life at the moment. And I was like, I'm already like struggling so much. And now you've just like taken away like my safe haven kind of thing. And so I was like really like frustrated at God at that moment. But I remember, and I think this is kind of what I'm getting at. I remember I had a friend at the time, and she's awesome. Her name's Katie, if she ever listens to this. But she like for weeks after that, she would like just go to the ocean with me, and for like the first day we just like dipped our feet in the water and just like walked around because just the thought of the ocean now just made me sick, and like the idea of surfing just
mm,
made me kind of want to vomit. And yeah, she would just like come to the beach with me every day and we'd just like touch the water or walk in the water, and then gradually we just went into the water up to our waist, and then we got our boards and paddled out, but we could still kind of touch the ground, so we hadn't gone far. And like eventually it got to the point where like she just kind of like as if I was a child, she just like teetered me back to the surf. And so I think having people who kind of know what we're going through and know what we're afraid of and what we're struggling with can be super helpful in like helping us to conquer those things, because sometimes that's really difficult to do alone. So I think like having people that you can let into that space can really help. But the other thing she did was she she kind of educated me about sharks and what they do in the ocean, that they're actually like protectors of the ocean, and that there's a million other things that you're probably going to die of before a shark. And um yeah, she just kind of like changed my perspective of things, I guess subtly and gradually. And so I think that kind of goes back to as well like um questioning things like, are these things that I'm afraid of, how likely is that going to happen? Like even though I just
mm.
kind of seen that happen, how likely was that actually going to happen again? And um yeah, I don't know, it was just really helpful, I guess, having someone like walk me through whatever I was afraid of, and um I guess change my thinking, like change that perspective that I had. Um yeah, so I think there's a few things. It's like Thanksgiving, having community, having someone to let you in, um, training your mind. There's one other one we had.
It would be remiss of me as a writer not to mention the catharsis that can be gained from writing down your emotions, your thoughts, actually keeping a journal or
Mm,
doing the morning pages kind of practice. I've talked about that here before and how it's helped me in some ways. But I remember a time in high school when I was really struggling with a lack of peace, basically. What am I going to do with my life? High school's great, church is great, family's great, but what happens next? I was afraid for the future, basically, that uncertainty of the future. And that's a lot of times what anxiety or worry can be based around. It's like, what's going to
mm,
happen down the track? And I remember deciding to write a poem that would hopefully, I had heard the idea of, angsty artists and getting your feelings out through the creative endeavors. And so I decided to write a poem. I wrote this poem. By the end of the poem, it had flipped from my anxiety, my worries, the darkness that I felt was burdening me, to the light. Enter the light. The light is the thing that can push away the darkness. And it was a personification of Jesus in this poem. I didn't intend to have the poem go that way, but as I was writing, it just sort of came in and gave me a sense of peace. And after that point, I knew that it was all going to be okay. I didn't have the answers. It was still a season of waiting and wondering what was going to happen, but I wasn't stressed or fearful about it. Some of the angst had just left. And so, yeah, as a writer, I would talk about the practice of writing out your thoughts and your feelings, writing out your prayers. That's good in two ways. First of all, it helps, get it out of your system. The second way is you can look back on those thoughts and those prayers and remember them in better times or in worse times, when you see, actually, God answered that prayer. I just didn't realize he'd done it. So yeah, I want to add that one. You've made a great list. Inform your emotions. Have people around you that can help you to reframe things. Writing, that's a good one. What was the other one? I'm missing one. Thanksgiving in everything. Very good. So that's a good practical list for us this week. If we're feeling like we don't have a lot of peace, the other thing we can do is check out the June 21 issue of Record and see that verses, the 10 verses. I imagine some time spent meditating on those verses and thinking about them would give some small comfort to those who are reading, I would hope. So there's another thing you can do. Read your Bible and pray every day, as the little song says.
Yeah, we've missed that one, but that's also great.
I think we mention it every week, so it's just a baseline for our viewers, our listeners. We know that we should be doing that. We should be doing that. We don't always do it as much as we should, but it's definitely helpful to your life. We recommend it here on Record Live. Well, I think we've run out of time, Zanita. That's been hopefully a helpful and practical conversation for our listeners and our viewers. Anything else we need to say?
See you next week.
We will see you next week. God bless, and can't wait for another week of Record Live.